Hello and welcome to the BMC Learning Series. Today we'll be covering MainView Architecture and the Explorer, Part 2. If you have not yet taken Part 1 of this series, please do this first. Now, picking up where we left off in Part 1, we're going to walk through how to create alarms. And again, the idea is not to teach you how to make alarms, but to make you aware that alarms can be created. So what are alarms? Alarms monitor targeted metrics and raise exceptions when thresholds are breached. We can interface MainView Alarm Manager with automation. We prefer Auto Operator, of course, but we can send to any automation solution. And you can then generate some kind of automated action to take place rather than just reporting the exception. We can set alarms on any data element from any of the MainView views. And they do, of course, allow you to define thresholds and to set filters, so we can restrict our alarms to look at only certain records and then tell us about them when they reach certain values. The MainView Alarm Manager alarms display will build in hyperlinks so that when you click on them, it will take you to the view where the alarm was detected. So whatever you are monitoring, it will take you back to that display, which provides a very nice launch point for doing some diagnosis. So how do we create an alarm? Well, we would right-click, then we navigate to the view we want to see and set the appropriate context. And then we'd right-click on the column header and select Create Alarm. And MainView is going to open the Alarm Manager dialog, such as this. And here we're going to be able to define what it is we want to look at. So we'll tell MainView what the context is, that is what targets we want to see. And then down here we can optionally give him a where clause, which is a complex filter. And then we tell MainView how often we want to wake up and look at these values. Now the default is 60 seconds, and that's a reasonable default. You're strongly discouraged from setting your evaluations lower than 60 seconds. Higher is better. Below that, we can specify a set of time periods and days of the week when the alarm should be active. So it may be desirable to have certain alarms active during the day and others only active during the night. And we can do that here. If we click the Next button, we'll be taken to another display that allows us to describe the condition that we're trying to evaluate. So up on top, we have some persistence fields that allow us to say, okay, this condition has to be true for this period of time or this number of times across this number of samples. Now in this case, I've said I want 2 samples, and if the 2 of them evaluate true, then I'm going to raise this critical exception. If one evaluates true, I'm going to raise this major exception. Now the same would apply for an information warning in minor exceptions, but I haven't set any thresholds for those, so they're not going to apply. So if I hit the Next button, I'm presented with this display, which allows us to tell the MainView Alarm Manager how we want to report the alarm. We can tell him we want to go to an internal view, the alarms view. We could say WTO yes, which will write it to the console. And then we can give him some message text. Maybe we want to augment this, put some additional values in there, and we can do so, or maybe move things around a bit. Certainly these are things we can do, although the default values tend to work for most customers. So we click on the Next button, and then we're taken to the Make panel, which is largely a documentation panel. But we can specify group names, certainly change alarm names, things like that. So once I've done all of this, I click the Save button and my alarm is built. That's the general flow for building an alarm. Key things to keep in mind when building alarms. Set alarms for conditions when the action is required. Do not generate informational alarms. What will happen invariably is you'll end up with a lot of cluttered display with a bunch of information that doesn't really require action, and unfortunately a lot of valid alarms will either be ignored or missed in this case. So the best practice is to only set alarms for conditions that require some kind of response. Always use a target context. So look at a single target or use the special context of CurSys, which says only look at targets on the local system. This is desirable so that MainView Alarm Manager doesn't start looking at things across the system. Then you're getting duplicate evaluations. It's just inefficient. So let's look at targets only on the local system. Also, try to avoid setting alarms on views that have a lot of data records. Examples of this would be device views to MainView for ZOS, or say thread views in DB2, queue views in MainView for WebSphere MQ, or transaction views in Kix. These views can typically find other ways to produce data. We're not going to talk about it in much detail here, but they are these background monitors provided with some of these solutions that can help provide exception reporting in a much more efficient way. I mentioned this earlier. Use an alarm frequency of at least 60 seconds. Going lower than that just burns cycles. I don't know that it really buys you that much, so the strong recommendation is to use 60 seconds or more. It's a best practice to check for condition persistence before generating an alarm. So we showed you the samples field. If you say put a minimum number of 2 there, and then 2 for your critical field, so that your alarm is only triggered when an event evaluates that condition to be true twice in a row. And the value of this is to eliminate a lot of spikes. So you may have things pop up and then come right back down again. We don't want to raise exceptions for those because those are not really issues necessarily. So if the condition persists for multiple samples, then we want to know about it. And the last thing is to use real-time views whenever possible. So the idea here is to smooth out the data that's being evaluated. If you're looking at interval data, what can happen is we see spikes early in the interval, and then we may get data before it's too late in the interval, whereas the real-time views will provide us with a rolling average, which is much more reflective of what's happening in the environment than might be seen in the interval data. So where do the alarms go once they're triggered? Well, they go to the Plex Manager Alarms view, which is an internal display of all the alarms, regardless of what products are generating them. They all come to the alarms view. There's an alerts note that provides a consolidation of your MainView alarms and some of the background monitors, so you have a consolidated display of your exceptions. And of course, we could pass the alarms to automation. Auto Operator, again, is our preferred solution, and it has some additional synergies, but we can interface to other automation solutions by issuing WTOs where they can be tracked by your automation solution and then take some sort of action. AO, or your other automation products, can do additional things. You can issue commands. You can execute Rex execs. You can generate email or some other types of notifications. Whatever you can do with your automation tool, you can have that triggered by an alarm. So nothing special with MainView Alarm Manager there, other than we can feed the exceptions, and of course, we pass a whole bunch of data rather than just the value that the exception was raised for. And here's what the alarms view looks like. So you can see we have a number of alarms here. See these guys in green? All these are informational alarms. Don't do that. These are here because we're using the demonstration system and we have a lot of stuff to test and show customers. So we have a lot of extraneous data out there. But in your environment, you really don't want these informational alarms. People will look at them initially, but after a while they tend to get ignored. So another thing I want to point out is that in the third field, you'll notice this greater than sign. That's the hyperlink back to the source view where the alarm was detected. So if you double click that, you'll go back to the view where you did the make alarm, and from there, you can do your diagnosis and see what else is going on in your environment. One thing I want to point out in the alarms view, you will see current alarms. When the alarms condition clears, and that's to say the alarm is evaluated and it's not true, then the alarm will be removed from the alarms display, and an ending alarm message will be generated to the console. Now let's take a look how we can customize our displays in MainView Explorer. Customizing the views to the MainView Explorer has some similarities to the 3270, but there are differences. It does have the same view customization options, although it presents them differently than what you see in the 3270. You can provide customization for containers and configurations, as well as the views. There are extensive charting capabilities available in MainView Explorer, and we'll take a look at that. And customized views are shared between your MainView Explorer session and your 3270 session. So if you customize them in the 3270, you can view them in the Explorer and vice versa. And this is because the view definitions are essentially the same and they're stored in the same library, the BBBDef library, which by default I told you is in your tsoid.bbbdef. Now if I want to modify the properties for a view, I can do this by clicking on the View Properties button here, or I could right-click on the tab and then select a series of different options from the menu that's presented there. But I'm going to click on the View Properties button, and MainView Explorer will present a window like this. And here you can see I have a number of different tabs that allow me to change various options for the view. So I can select whatever I want, make my changes, and then I'm good to go. I can change my colors of my fonts. I can change my charting values. We'll show you how you can do some of that. And you can also modify your filters and contexts here, although you could do the same in the view using the command box or by selecting menu items or buttons. So let's look at an example of how we might customize a filter. And we're going to do this by right-clicking on the field we want to send the filter for, in this case, %utilization. So I right-click and I select Edit Filter from the menu, and MainView Explorer will pop open a window where I can specify my filter arguments. In this case, I want to say I'm only interested in seeing the file systems that have utilization of greater than 80%. So I type that in, and then I click OK, and you can see my list is filtered. So now I'm only seeing file systems that are 80% utilized or greater. I can do a similar thing if I want to modify the thresholds. Again, I right-click on the column header, and this time I select Edit Thresholds. And when I select Edit Thresholds, MainView Explorer will open a window like this. And here I can specify what my condition for the thresholds is and how I want the data displayed. Important to point out that the conditions are always evaluated top-down, so make sure your most restrictive arguments are first. So if we had, for instance, put k greater than or equal to 0 first in this list of conditions, then it would always evaluate true and none of the other conditions would apply. So put your most restrictive arguments first. Now we do have the ability to move things around using the move up and move down buttons. So you can reorder your conditions and make sure your most restrictive arguments are first. You can also insert and remove conditions using the insert and remove buttons. So we set our conditions. If I click in the attribute field, what's going to happen is MainView Explorer is going to open a little legend that shows what attributes map to what types of display values. So it will show you, for instance, the 4 is red and the yellow is 2. It will show you that they're reverse video or not, and so on. And the substitute field allows us to substitute a literal value in that field when that condition is true. Not often used, but it's a possibility. So maybe you want to use it, maybe you don't. So you can see here I've set my thresholds now, and I've got my filter applied to my view. Pretty easy to do this. Now once I've customized my view, I say, yeah, I like it, I want to keep it. I can click on the same view button, the little disk icon, and then I'll be prompted to give it a name. I'll call this one FSJF for a file system Jeff, and then I can save it and we're good to go. Now MainView Explorer containers are a special tab in the MainView Explorer that contain multiple views and charts. Containers are opened as separate tabs, just like views. And if you want to add a display into a container, all you need to do is drag the tab into the container. A container is similar to a 3270 screen in that it allows you to bring the data displays from multiple places into a single pane of glass. So if I want to create a view container, I can do this in two ways. I can select File and then Create View Container. Or I can click on the Create View Container button. Either way gets to the same place. It'll open you a tab. You give it a name and it'll open a tab with that name. I'll call mine Test Container. And then you can see I have an empty display pane here. So if I want to put some data in there, all I need to do is drag the tabs over. So here I have a DB2 overview for a DB2 subsystem called DAGA. If I want to add that to my test container, all I do is click on DAGA and drag it into the Test Container tab. And you can see that it adds the data to my container. Now I can repeat this for additional tabs. If I want to add a task in there, I can do that, and some additional stuff. And I'll end up with something like this. Now by default, MainView Explorer is going to organize and arrange your views and charts in a way that's logical. And you might not like what it initially comes up with. Perhaps you want to change things around a bit. So in order to do so, what you need to do is first right-click on the Name tab for the container, up here, Test Container, and select Arrange Windows Freeform. And once you do that, MainView Explorer will no longer be modifying the layout of your display. If you fail to do that, you can modify things, but when you redisplay the container, MainView Explorer will put it back in the format that it thought it should be in. So if you select Arrange Windows Freeform, it will present your formatting. Then you can move things around as you like, and it will stick. Now, MainView Explorer configurations are your arrangements for all of your views and settings for all of your open tabs. Your configurations are saved in the BBC Def library, which should be in your tsoid.bbbcdef. The name you give it will be the name of the PDS member in that library. And if you want to share it with somebody else, you just copy that PDS member to their library. Or if it's something you want to share to the entire organization, you can copy it to the sbbcdef library. Then everybody will have access to that configuration in their open configurations list. So there are a couple of ways we can save configurations. We can go to the File menu and select Save Configuration, or we can click on the Save Configuration button up here near the upper left. Either way, we'll be prompted for a file name, and again, it's an 8-character name. It's really a PDS member in the ZOS. And down here, we can say, I want to set this as my default configuration at the start of the session. And that way, when I start my MainView Explorer session, it will automatically open this configuration. So I have my nice ordered display populated for me when I start. Once I've specified those values, I click Save and my configuration is saved. If I want to open a configuration, I can do that in a couple of ways. I can go to a file, open configuration, and I'll be presented with a list of configurations that are available. So I scroll through the list, find the one I want, and then I click Open, and my configuration will be displayed in the display pane. A lot of times in the MainView Explorer, you're going to want to play with charts. The charts can provide a nice graphical illustration of what's going on in the environment. All of the views come with the default charts that may or may not be of value to you. Some of them are better than others, but certainly you can modify the charts and make them meaningful in most cases. So if we want to open the chart associated with a view, we can do that in two ways. We can right-click on the View tab and then select Open Chart from the menu list. Or we can click on the Chart button on the toolbar. So when we do that, we're going to get a default chart, and it may look like this. But we can certainly modify things. So let's take a look at some of these charting buttons, and then we'll talk about how we can modify these charts. When we open a chart, you'll notice that the toolbar changes a little bit, and there's some additional and different icons that are displayed that allow us to modify how the chart is being formatted. So the first button allows us to toggle on the stacking of values. So we can say, my bar charts, I want it cumulative, I want to see the totals, as well as broken down by various entries in the legend. And we can use stacking to do so. We can display 2D bar charts, 2D column charts, 2D area charts, 2D line charts, and then we can do 3D bar charts, area charts, line charts, etc., and what these buttons correspond to. And we can also break things down into pie charts. We can do gauge charts, which can be full circles or half circles. And you can set your thresholds as little red lines in your graphics, however you want to do that. Another thing we can do is select the View Properties button that will pop up the same values here under the chart. Additionally, we can specify title for our chart, as well as the X and Y axes values. So if I click on the Items tab, then I can tell MainView Explorer what data I want to put in the chart. So in this case, I said, well, I want my x-axis to be time, and then I'm going to look at some other values and I want to chart those out. So I can do that there. Note that there are some additional fields, unfortunately, that aren't being displayed here that allow us to do some things. But what's of most interest is getting the data into the chart. And if you want to do some trending charts, you set your x-axis to the time value. And then you'll want to select the metrics you want to put into the display and set something like this in the case of system name, and do a transpose Y item, which says, I want that item to be in my legend, and I want to tell the chart my Y items for that value. So you'll be able to chart multiple rows. If that's unclear or you need a refresher on it, use the Help button. The MainView Explorer provides a good discussion on this topic, so it could be very helpful in doing your trending charts or other types of customization. So if I've customized a display and I like it, maybe I want to publish it to an external place where people can view it outside of the MainView Explorer. So if I click the Publish button, what's going to happen is we're going to generate an HTML file to a location that you tell him to. And he's going to take the image of that view, not the actual view data, and put an image in the view. And once that data has been published, you can use any web browser to go and display that HTML file. If you've set your publishing view, and in this case it's the FS view, if I go ahead and click the auto update, right here the little circular red arrows, what's going to happen is this view is going to get updated at regular intervals. I think the default is 30 seconds. And what the user can do is update their browser by hitting the refresh button, and it will bring in the most recent copy of this HTML display. So they'll get the sense of seeing real-time data as it changes when they do their refreshes, but they actually don't have the data. It's an image of the data. Here's an example of a container, and again, we can publish this entire container. It'll look just like this in the browser when you open them, because it's just an image of this display. So if we set the auto refresh, then you have the ability to do browser refreshes and get this new data. Alternative to publishing data is to export data. And exporting the data allows us to take the actual data, not the view data, and put it into a file. And then we can use MainView Explorer Viewer to open that file and view the data. Now by default, when you do your exports, it's going to update the .1 file. And the .1 file is going to be referenced in the MainView Explorer Viewer. Now you have the option to preserve history and keep a series of these files. And so you can tell them, hey, I want to keep these files around, and MainView will increment the .1 file to .2, the .2 to .3, and so on. So everything will get moved down, and then the .20 file in this case will fall off, since I told them I only want to keep around 20 of these files. I have the option to import my files when I open the MainView Explorer Viewer. So I would select File and Import View from the File button, and I would point them to the path where I exported my file. Now using MainView Explorer's Viewer does not require a TSO ID or password, so it can be useful to display data where people might want to look at it and move things around, but you don't want them to take action or do anything harmful, and you certainly don't want to give them TSO access, so this is a good way around that. Here's an example of a view in the MainView Explorer Viewer. It looks just the same as it does in the MainView Explorer. It's just that you don't have the ability to take actions here. But you can display the data, which is a very nice capability. So wrapping up, there's a couple of more things that I'd like to mention. One piece of the MainView infrastructure that we haven't talked about is a component called MainView Threshold Advisor. This comes with any of the MainView solutions. It's not a chargeable feature. And what it does is it captures metrics and calculates meaningful thresholds for those values based on the occurrence of the values in your environment. And once this happens, we have enough samples over, say, a few weeks or maybe a few months that we can analyze that data and we can determine what thresholds make sense in your environment and give you the option to push those thresholds back to the MainView monitors, where they can be used to set your thresholds in your views and your alarms. We provide you with several hundred metrics that we recommend. You can pick from this list, or you can pick other things. And what's going to happen is Threshold Advisor is going to also monitor those thresholds to see if the data trends are increasing or decreasing, and maybe that would warrant a reconsideration of those threshold values. Maybe you need to go back and do another analysis to see if those values should be today as they were a few months ago when you did this process. MainView provides a holistic set of monitors for monitoring and managing your entire z/OS ecosystem. You can see here we cover all of the major subsystems in z/OS, as well as a few other things. There are powerful capabilities, very robust, holistic solutions that provide integration. If you want additional information on these topics and more, I'd refer you to the MainView User's Guide. You can also review the MainView documentation set and some quick courses on specific topics, such as this course here. And of course, you have the BMC support site for additional information. That concludes this series on MainView architecture and the Explorer. For more videos on MainView and other BMC solutions, please visit our BMC mainframe YouTube channel at youtube.com/user/BMC /BMC software mainframe /featured. That's it for this series. Thank you and see you next time.